Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back with us to the PSI Effect Podcast. We appreciate you being here as we enter into the new year, 2026. We just want to welcome you in and, appreciate you being here today. Appreciate everything that you did for us last year, and we're looking forward to spending the new year with you. I'm excited about things to come and excited to be here in this space with my brother Franky there.
Hey.
And we're going to continue this journey with you. So Franky, let's talk to the folks, man. How's things been? How was your New Year's celebration, sir?
Hey, I'm still standing. That's the best way I could put it. I'm still standing. Not to say that I was partying so hard and things like that I may not have been standing, but just glad to have made it through. We've kind of talked about New Year's. We talked about it on the front end with our kind of retrospective right there on New Year's Eve. And, we came in hot for the new year with our last episode. So I think I'm just really feeling a lot of gratitude right now, feeling really fortunate and really excited. And on the precipice of a whole new year. We've got a lot of things in store here in the podcast space, a lot of things happening that are very positive in my personal lives. Yeah, I'm sitting high on the hog, as the old folks would say.
You think about eating, of course, and it's part of what you think about. And so I had company over the holidays. I had an aunt who was in town, and she was actually our matriarch of our family. And so she, for years and years, man, she has been baking these lemon pound cakes. And let's just say I indulged a bit in the pound cake. So as we look forward at these resolutions, somehow, some way, I'm going to have to think about the exercise and weight loss resolution that we talked about in our last episode. But it was good stuff, man. Spending time with family, and we hung out, and she didn't watch a whole lot of TV, doesn't watch a whole lot of movies, and so we watched a few movies, let her get caught up on a few things, play some games, and just had a really good time.
Yeah, I'll tell you, there is no substitute for time with family, time with people you love, time with friends. I mean, just communing with folks. There's something special about that. Just and that's what the holiday seasons are really about, is spending time. We talked about it before, being present, sharing that time with folks that are special to us. And there's also no substitute for lemon pound cake, sir. And, it's times like these when it upsets me that we're not geographically closer so that I could come and partake and do my part to make sure you don't overly indulge. So, I need to share that burden with you. And in addition to doing push-ups at the coffee maker, it sounds like we're going to start doing some sit-ups and some other sort of calisthenics type of work if we want to be able to keep up with what we're shoveling down our gullets here.
I tell you, somehow or some way, we got to make it easy because, those sit-ups, those are not easy for me.
Well, man. It harkens back to what we talked about in our resolutions episode. We talked about one of those, one of the most common resolutions that people make, was to get in shape or to lose weight and things like that. And, I was thinking about spending some time thinking about that last episode, and it was pricking some things in my mind, some correlations, and it made me reflect back to two books that I read recently, and it was The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the reason those two books kind of came to me from our last discussion, we spent a lot of time talking about resolutions and, making these resolutions and wanting to make changes and things like that. And I had a bit of an epiphany, and that was, well, really what we're talking about when we make resolutions, wanting to make these changes, we're talking about changing our habits. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about changing our habits. So I thought it would be good for us today to just kind of talk about habits, generally speaking, and leaning into how we might be able to harness our habits to be more successful with our resolutions. Because you made a great point in our last conversation about how we have a high failure rate with New Year's resolutions. So maybe learning a little bit more about habits and how habits work and how we could possibly leverage those for our benefit could help us be a little more successful.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I know we don't really think about our resolutions as habits, but when you think about what we declare as a resolution, it really is around habits. So that makes a whole lot of sense because, working out, going to the gym, you got to form that habit in order to, be successful, to do that consistently. It makes a lot of sense. Dieting, any number of things that you can come up with for your resolution. Cool. So let's dig in, man. What else you got for us?
Well, we throw that word habit around quite a bit. And I think what's important is before we get started in the conversation is let's make sure we kind of level set with our listeners as to defining what a habit is. So let's start there. So I guess I'll start by picking your brain, Neug. What are some things that you do that you consider to be a habit?
Well, now in these early days of 2026, and I have you to thank for it, Franky, is the push-ups at the coffee maker. I mean, I would say that now at this point in time, though that is a habit. You load the coffee maker, you hit brew, and you get those push-ups done. And so, when we first embarked on that journey later in 2025, and you mentioned that that's what you do, it was not a habit for me. Doing push-ups on a daily basis was not a habit at all. And so when I tied that to my coffee making, it became a habit. So, that's one of the things that I could say is definitely a habit in my life right now. So
I got you. An example for me would be every day when I get in the car to leave the house for the first time each day. As soon as I get in the car, before I crank the car up, I'll say a little prayer. And, doesn't matter what time of day it is. It's like, but as soon as I'm leaving the house for the first time for the day, I say a little prayer when I get into the car. That's a simple habit for me. You mentioned the push-ups at the coffee maker. What is it? What particular characteristics of that activity make it a habit? Why would you call that a habit?
Well, I think first and foremost is the consistency. I mean, I think a habit has to do with what you do on a consistent basis. And so that would be the biggest characteristic is something that I do consistently every morning. And so I would say, maybe the other thing is that it's tied to that cup of coffee, which is something that I have to have in the morning, which you probably saw me sipping on some coffee just a few minutes ago. And so, I've tied it to that coffee. And so I got to get that push-up done in order to get that cup of coffee. And it's consistent. So I will say that those are a couple of things that make it a habit for me.
And I think you hit on all the points there. I think one of the things associated with habits is that it's repetitive. It kind of becomes ingrained after repetition after so many times. So if you want to form a habit, you got to get the reps in. You've got to repeat it so many times that it almost becomes automatic. You don't even think about it anymore. One example that's, scares me sometimes is, driving. If you like driving back and forth to work or driving back and forth to a place where you go pretty often, you do that enough times, sometimes, at least for me, my brain kind of just tunes out. Especially if I've got a good podcast going, like the PSI Effect Podcast, or an audiobook that I'm listening to on my commute. If I'm really enthralled in that, sometimes, I'll get in the car leaving from work and I'll get home and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember much about my drive home. I was enthralled in what I do. And the repetition of that is that our brains have made things somewhat automatic for us. So habits are really a technique that our brain uses to kind of help us out. So how do you think habits are helpful for us from our brain's perspective? What do you think, Neug?
So I think it helps us get to a place where we're comfortable. When we do things consistently, and it's just something that we become very comfortable with. And I think that at times it can be harmful to us because we don't really stretch outside of that comfort. And I can imagine that taking on a new habit helps you stretch your brain a bit to do some other things. And if you're like me, and being someone who was in the military, those types of habits, if you will, or habits make you more efficient in some ways. For instance, when I cook, when I'm finished cooking a meal, the dishes are already done, the pots and pans are already clean, right? But it's just the way that I go about preparing that meal that those things get done. And so I think that it just puts you in a comfortable place, but it also puts you in a place where things just make sense to you, right? Like for me, it just makes sense for me to make sure that all the pots and pans and utensils are clean by the time I'm finished preparing that meal.
I like what you did there. There are two words that you use that I think really will help us bring this home for our listeners. You use the word comfort. And for me, sometimes that word comfort can be synonymous with effort. So if it's something that's comfortable, to me, that means it takes less effort for us to get it done. And the second word that you used was efficient. Efficiency. And those are the two things that are really the driving factor behind why our brain creates habits. Habits allow our brain to create shortcuts when it's solving problems. Our brain is seeking the most efficient path to a solution, and habits represent that path. So when you think about it, we learn by trial and error. If you really boil it down to it, we learn by trial and error. So we're presented with a problem. Our brain has to kind of figure out what's going on. We're taking in new information. Our brain is kicking into high gear because it's something we haven't encountered before. We take in new information, we have to analyze, and then we have to make conscious decisions to try to find a solution. So our brain is working at a very high level, using a lot of energy, trying to solve this problem. So every once in a while, we'll have a situation where, we're trying to solve this problem and we come across a solution. Like, oh, that solved the problem. And our brain remembers that. It's like, all right, well, what happened prior to this solution? And if we run into that, if we do this enough, it starts to wear a path, for lack of a better term, in our brain. And our brain says, okay, if this happens, just do this because it leads to the solution. And what we end up seeing is that that's a habit forming. Our brain is making a mental shortcut. If this, then do this. We don't have to take in new information. Our brain is not having to do all this analysis. We're not even making conscious decisions. That's habit formation. And our brain does it because it allows our brain to be more efficient, and we don't have to do all this manual decision making along the way. That's what our habits do for us.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense because, I go back to the whole cooking analogy and, things that I analyze from, let's say, a specific recipe, and I, go about it in a certain way. If I perform a different type of recipe that has something similar, then I think my brain automatically goes back to how I was able to, um, you know, uh, analyze and get through that particular task on that recipe. So um, I guess you could say that your brain remembers rather quickly those types of repetitive motions that that
Mhm.
become your habits.
Yeah, absolutely. And repetitive encounters or repetitive motions is really the key there. Something that happens frequently, and our brain starts to recognize the pattern. And then once the pattern is kind of figured out, our brain is like, okay, I know what's about to happen here, so I'm going to take this action. And to a certain extent, it even becomes automatic. So, that is habit formation. And once a habit is formed, the level of this is what surprised me. The level of activity in our brain actually decreases. So if we were to get into one of those, MRI machines where it can look at brain activity while things are going on, the first time we encounter a task, we're going to have really high level of brain activity. But once that habit forms, doing the same action or solving the same problem, we're going to see much less brain activity because our brain has created these new pathways, this habit shortcut to get to the solution.
Yeah, and you made me think about, as we're talking about this repetitive motion and habits, it makes me think of a saying that, has been around for light years. That is, it takes 21 days to uh, create a habit or 21 days to break a habit. When you think about that, it's not really the time. I mean, I guess it could be 21 days if you repeat the process for
Yes,
21 days, right?
exactly.
So it's less about time and more about repetition. You got to get those reps in. You got to be consistent with it. Just like the push-ups, you got to do it every morning. Once you
Right.
do it every morning, it becomes that habit. So it's less about time and more about how often or how consistent you are with that pattern of behavior that creates that habit. And I guess the same is
Yeah.
true if you're someone who watches, a lot of television at night, right? So maybe you have your meal, maybe you have your meal at the TV and you sit there and you watch, 4 or 5 hours of TV or whatever it is, and you do that night after night after night after night, then that's your evening habit. You come in, you
Mhm.
have dinner, you watch TV, and then whatever comes next, right? So it's more about the repetition than it is about the time.
Absolutely. And if we take that back to, the context of our New Year resolutions, that just further reinforces what we talked about with the need for getting in the repetitions, being consistent with what we're trying to do as we're engaging with these resolutions. We're trying to either form new habits or break existing habits. So the repetition is key. Even if we're trying to break an existing habit, that repetition is going to be key. So that's one of our keys to success is get the reps in. Get the reps in.
So when you talk about reps, I'm thinking about working out, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
do you think that once you get into the habit of, say, doing sit-ups, and I'm using sit-ups because you kind of threw that out there as something that we might want to embark on. But do you think it's once you start getting into the reps, so do you think it's easier to do, say, 10 sit-ups than it is to do 15 or 20 sit-ups once you get into that rep?
I don't know if easy is the right word, but the key is to do something, to show up. That's one of the things that, I tell my kids. It's one of the things I've told interns in the professional space. Just showing up is one of the biggest victories that you could have. Because so many times we just like, well, I don't feel like doing that today. I'm not going to do anything. Just show up to do something. Even if it's just, I'm going to do 3 sit-ups. Do something. Doing 3 sit-ups is better than doing no sit-ups. And that's starting to build those repetitions. And once you do 3, like, okay, I did 3. I didn't die. I might be a little sore the next day, but I survived it. And that's adding a check mark in the column of the behavior that we want to have by just showing up and doing something, getting at least 1 rep in. So I don't think the number of reps, I don't know if we can necessarily quantify and say there's a threshold, but I definitely think there's value in showing up and doing something. Doing something is always better than doing nothing.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. You sometimes you have to tell yourself that you do have to show up because, staying with the exercise analogy, the exercise regimen part is difficult for a lot of us. And, I know for me, back in the day when I was a runner, not a runner anymore, I'll leave that to, people like you, Frankie, because I know you're a runner. But, just getting those shoes on, right, and getting that warm up in before you start that run, and then your first couple of steps um, is really what pushes you, or what pushed me, to get going. The thing was, I showed up, I put on the shoes, I got out there, I did the stretches, and I started to run. And, before you know it, you could run a half a mile, and then you could run a mile, and then you could run 2 miles. And then, back in my heyday, I was running in the morning before I went to work, a couple of miles, 2, 3 miles. And then I was running another 2, 3 miles when I got home. Um, but it was just, like you said, just showing up. And even on those days when it was a little chillier, or when it was a little misty, rainy, you still, you tell yourself that you gotta get up and you gotta get going. And once you do, um, honestly, even through the rain, it felt good.
Yeah.
So showing up is definitely a big part of it.
Absolutely. And, our habits are such an important part of our whole behavioral model and kind of how we navigate life. And if we really want to think about it, our habits are kind of the building blocks of our outcomes. The habits we have are what lead to the outcomes that we see, positive or negative. Our
Right.
habits are those building blocks. So, I guess if you want to look at it, you can say, if you're talking about measurements, we could say that our outcomes are a lagging measure of our habits. So the outcomes that we get tell us about our habits. Prime example, my sons like to play basketball. And one of the things, if you've got a kid that plays basketball, one of the things that you may have a conversation about is, well, Dad, I want to get more playing time. I want to be in the game more. It's like, okay, that's good. That's a great goal to have.
Got to do that work, right?
There we go. It's like, because,
Gotta do that.
you want playing time. Yeah, are you going to practice? Yeah. Are you working hard to practice? Yeah, those are great. But when you get home, what are you doing? Oh, you're getting on that computer. You're getting on that Nintendo, sitting down and watching television, and you're not putting in any work outside of the practice space. So your outcome, which is you're not getting as much playing time as you would like to have, is a lagging measure of the habits you had leading up to that outcome, right? So that's why I really think it's important to understand our habits for our goals, because we set these New Year resolutions, and our habits really represent our systems that are going to help us that will ultimately determine whether or not we achieve the goals. We don't the James Clear said it best in his book, Atomic Habits. He said, we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. And in this case, our systems are our habits.
That makes a lot of sense. Even when you think about things like, manufacturing, if manufacturers kept the same systems that they used, 20 or 30 years ago, they would fall way behind the marketplace and what's happening today. Efficiencies and product quality and everything, just based on how technology has evolved. And we have to evolve as well in our everyday um, practices, and that's how we get better. Talking about your son and doing the work and become a better basketball player. Um, it's the same thing with everyday life and the habits that you create, and just becoming efficient, becoming making sure that you're consistent, and just putting in that work. And as you said, they can be positive habits, they could be negative habits, positive energy, negative energy. But I can tell you that once you, or at least for me, once you get into that habit, if it's something that you are really wanting to achieve, it's something that you're really passionate about, you get a really good feeling with that positive outcome, because you've achieved something that you want, that you set your mind to do. And it's personally rewarding to get to that point, whether it's a resolution or whether it's just some other goal that you have created for yourself. That personal satisfaction that you were able to achieve it, I think is very important in helping you with the next goal.
Absolutely. And that's that snowball effect that we've talked about before. We talked about it with the sense of gratitude, but that's that snowball effect where small victories start to add up and you start to get more momentum, and that gives you more motivation. So if our habits are structured in a way that can lead us to that type of outcome, absolutely, that's going to be extremely powerful in helping us get to our goals. And you mentioned, positive and negative habits. I think we tend to try to classify habits as good habits or bad habits. How do we make that determination about whether it's a good habit or a bad habit based on what we know about habits now from this discussion?
It's really difficult, I think, to determine if it's good or bad, because what's good for me may not be good for you, first and foremost. But honestly, I think good habits and bad habits are what was created in culture and society. Because, like I said, what could be good for me may not be good for you. And the other part of it is, if you look at, for instance, if you want to become a better ball player and you're not putting in the work, well, maybe you have good habits when you're in the gym and when you're at practice, but you have poor habits when you're out of the gym because you're not working on honing that skill. So it can be something that works in unison in your attempt to achieve that goal. If you're only halfway in the game, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, I think the notion of good habits and bad habits is somewhat of an oxymoron, is that I don't know if we can really classify them as good and bad. Because if we think about what a habit is, we talked about a habit is a technique that our brain uses to create shortcuts so that our brain can be more efficient. That's what a habit is. Our brain is trying to say, all right, I want to be more efficient so that I don't have to use as much energy when I encounter this situation. So in that case, any habit is successful in helping your brain to create a shortcut and be more efficient. I think the way that we look at it is that the habit either works for us towards the goals we're trying to achieve, or it works against us for goals we're trying to achieve. It's pushing us, moving us forward, or standing in front of us, pushing us backwards. And I don't know if we're necessarily good and bad really encapsulate that.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is a good point. It makes sense, but I think the average person really doesn't look at it that way, right? They don't internalize it to that depth. But you're right. It works for you or it works against you. And in layman's terms, I think it's a good or bad, right? If it's working against you, then it's not good, right? If it's working for you, then it's good. So I guess it's just semantics and the way that folks interpret, that particular outcome. But I like how you frame that. It's either working for you or it's working against you.
So with that in mind, I think it's important for us to kind of reflect. This is a good time for us to lean into the pause and to reflect on what habits do we have, like perform a habit inventory. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to challenge our listeners to take a moment to pause and just sit down and list out things that you identify as habits that you have. And the thing about it is you may want to enlist the help of an accountability partner, trusted friend, somebody that you know is going to be honest with you. Because I know, at least for me, some of my habits are so automatic that I don't even realize I have them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Yeah. So as you create that list of the habits that you have, I think that you'll be surprised actually, and things will come up that you do just so, as you say, so automatically, and you may not consider them a habit. You may just consider them something that you do. So it'll be interesting how the audience comes to realize the different habits that they actually have. And I think that can push you into, it can push you into a decision actually, because you may determine that some of the habits that you came up with as you reflect are habits that are not working for you necessarily, but they're just something that you actually do automatically.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as we create this list, I think one thing that would be awesome, you and I can do this exercise along with our listeners. Let's create this habit inventory. We create this list of habits that we have and sit down and really think about them in terms of where we're trying to go, what we want to achieve, who we want to be. And let's kind of categorize them. Put a plus beside it if that habit is working for us. Put a minus beside it if that habit is working against us. And what this will do, this will actually be like we're doing a reconnaissance, like we're on a mission to achieve our New Year resolutions. This is like doing reconnaissance for that mission. This will say, all right, here are the habits that are already in place. How does this list of habits that I've just created set the table either for success or for defeat for this New Year resolution that I have? And again, not to limit it to just New Year resolution, to this goal that I have that could be in June or July. How do these habits that I have impact my ability to succeed at this new objective that I've set for myself? And I think that'll be a valuable exercise for us and for our listeners going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's what I alluded to earlier, is that I think it'll push you into a situation where you decide if it's working for you or if it's working against you. And if it's one of those habits that has a minus by it, it could quite possibly be something that is not working for you. And maybe it's just something that you need to reformulate, right? And maybe it's not necessarily a habit that is working against you, but maybe the way that you go about it makes it a habit that is in the minus column, because I think that we're, even through this whole process, we're still evolving.
Right.
And even like when I think about recipes, you may prepare it a certain way, and then when it's all said and done, you say, oh man, I should have probably did this way or that way to make it better. And so I think sometimes our habits may not necessarily be bad or negative. Maybe we just don't have them formulated in the right way to be a benefit for us. So keep that in mind too. And I also like the fact that you talked about accountability partners, which, that's something that's been around for a long time. And I don't know how often we actually use that for our benefit, right? It can be a benefit for us, and it can be a benefit for the person who is our accountability partner, especially if it's a two-way street of accountability. And so I think that that's a very interesting point to make, and I think that there's a lot of benefit in that if it's worked the right way. Because I think too about back in the days, like I said, when I was first getting into running, having somebody to run with you made me run better, stronger, farther, right? Somebody to help push you, especially on those days when you really didn't want to get up.
Whew, man, yes, you are preaching right now. Kyle Zachary that we had as a guest on the podcast, he was my accountability partner in terms of, our athletic endeavors, running, working out, doing all these obstacle course races. And yeah, what you said couldn't be truer is when you have that accountability partner, the hard work is a little more palatable when it's time to do it. Doesn't say make it easier. This makes it a little bit more palatable, and it's more likely that you'll get the reps in when you've got an accountability partner. So that is a very important piece of the habit puzzle. But yeah, I think it's important for us and for our audience to go and do this habit inventory. Make a list of the habits that we have, and then put a plus beside them if they're working for us. Put a minus beside them if they're working against us, and see what we can learn from that as we apply it to the achieving of our goals.
Absolutely. Well, Frankie, we talked about a lot in this episode.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring us home? Like, give us a summary of where we're at from what we talked about.
So, again, this was inspired by, our conversation about New Year resolutions, and it brought to mind, those two authors, Charles Duhigg and James Clear, and their books around habits, because when we're trying to set our resolutions, we're either trying to create a new habit or we're trying to break a bad habit or to break an existing habit. So we wanted to talk about what habits are. Habits are ways that our brain creates shortcuts to help us solve problems more efficiently, find solutions to situations. If this, then do this. And those habits, whether they work for us or against us, really have a huge impact on the outcomes that we see when we set goals. So understanding how our habits are formed, how they work, is a great first step for us understanding the playing field that we're operating on when we're trying to achieve our objectives for our New Year resolutions or for our goals, generally speaking. And the first step, like we mentioned, that we want our audience to take is to do a habit inventory. Write down all the habits that you have. You should enlist the help of an accountability partner, because some of our habits may be invisible to us. So having an accountability partner can help us see those, and then put a plus beside it if it's working for you, put a minus beside it if it's working against you. And best believe we've got a lot more to talk about in the realm of habits. So I think we'll have some follow-up episodes where we dig a little bit deeper into the specifics of, how these pieces of the habit loop work together and how we can manipulate those to really harness the power of habits in our lives.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, is how they loop, because, when you talk about repetition, I mean, you're just doing the same things, over and over and over and over and over again. It is a loop, whether it's positive or negative, it is a loop. And so it will be interesting to dig a little deeper into that as we move through the year and see how many wins we can have with our goals and resolutions. And I invite our audience to, put a note in the comments about the habits that you are working on, the habits that you would like to either improve or get rid of, what your resolutions are. Drop us some notes in the comments. I also want to say that, this podcast, you hear Frankie and I talking about different things like habits, but, we're not professional, therapists or anything like that. So the thoughts that come forward in this podcast are thoughts that come from, things that we've learned, things that we've read, our experiences in life. And so we're on this journey with you as mere mortals on this planet. Uh, but, it's a journey. And the key part, as Frankie mentioned earlier, is showing up. You got to show up if you want to make it to the other side. You got to show up. So I invite you to take the challenge, make your list of habits as Frankie outlined, and let's see where we can end up at the end of the year.
Yes, indeed.
So Frankie, we're at the end here. Why don't you invite the folks to listen or tell them where they can find us?
Well, you can always find us on just about every podcast platform that's out there for the audio version of the podcast. So Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those. If you go to the PSI website, this is psipod.com. Click on the episodes link. You'll see all of our episodes as well as links to all of the different podcast distribution platforms where we are available. We're also on YouTube, so check us out on YouTube to see the video version of the podcast. You can search for the PSI Effect, or you can just find us with our handle at This Is PSI Pod, which is also our handle for social media at This Is PSI Pod. That is for TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Come find us. Hopefully you can form a new habit of listening to the PSI Effect podcast as well as interacting with us on social media. So let's get those reps in so we can get that habit formed.
Absolutely, Franky. That was good. I like how you segued into that. Definitely. Comments are welcome. We read the comments. We respond to the comments. So definitely don't be shy. Let us know what's going on. So we really do appreciate you being here with us. We're looking forward to this new 2026 and being on this journey with you and sharing what's going on in our lives. And, hopefully we can help some of you with some of the things that you may be struggling with, which is what this PSI podcast is all about. So we thank you for being here. We will welcome you back next Wednesday. So come out and join us. And, until then, just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are absolutely legendary. And so until next time, go out there, be brave, and rise on purpose. Thank y'all.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.